genus called Mexipedium. I don't know what the status of that is lately.
Back to frag.
Back to frag. So we're back to frag xerophyticum. But in any event, it's kind of unique. And some people think, as I said, that it's a separate species of its own genus. So what we're going to do then is ask our student, I don't know who is it, Joanne going to do it or is Sue? Sue's going to do it, okay. Sue's going to explain how this shapes up against previous awards.
Sue?
One question is,
Okay.
have this been previously awarded, this particular one?
Yes. I didn't need one that large.
No.
No,
Yeah. Okay,
This clone has never been
nope.
previously awarded.
so you guys are done. Okay.
Go ahead,
So for me
talk to them.
Okay. Well, I haven't done a measurement of the flowers yet, but in the research that I've done on this plant, there are, I think it was 4 previous awards, 4 or 5, at least 4 of them were cultural awards, and 1 received an HCC for the flower size. In the research that I've done on the plant, on this one, at least for culture, it has a higher flower count than previously awarded cultural awards given, and a higher bud count. The flower count is good, and it has more inflorescence as far as the number of spikes here that have the flowers. I also researched the color and looked to see if it's comparable to the color. The color is comparable to the also awarded plants. Ideally, if you can take it out in the sunlight to look at the color, you really see the true color and, you know, the texture of the plant, of the flower, if it's kind of matte, or the substance of it, if it's matte or crystal-like, or the diamond dust, but I didn't get to do that with it. If I was going to, in bringing it to the judges, I would recommend it to be judged, because I think it has the potential for, in my own opinion, it has the potential for a cultural award, because it meets the criteria of being awarded, and it is somewhat above the previously awarded ones as far as its, you know, the flower count and that.
What's the count of the inflorescences?
The flower count on this one, there's 42 flowers, 78 buds on 45 inflorescence.
Okay.
And on the most current awarded, I forgot the date, it had a CCE, which is a Certificate of Cultural Excellence, of 97 points, and it had 36 flowers, 69 buds, and 33 inflorescence. So just by looking at that, I felt it was that it's worth the judges taking a look at to be possibly awarded.
Okay.
Strengths and weaknesses of this plant being exhibited.
Well, where I'm not real familiar with the plant, the strength of it, in my opinion, would be, one, its growth pattern, that it grows low, it grows nice, it's very firm, the leaves are very firm. The flowers themselves are very erect, they have a firm type of a texture to them. Seems to be somewhat floriferous. The weakness of it seems to be, for me, how what's considered the petals on the side, some of them kind of twist, some of them are, you know, they seem to hold themselves fine. But I don't really, and that's part of my learning process as a student, to learn more about a plant so I can spot more weaknesses or more strengths than I see initially. So I'm a little weak on what those strengths and weaknesses are at this point.
Looking at it as a cultural plant, for to score for culture, is there a weakness in its presentation?
Yes, there is a weakness in its presentation for scoring it for cultural. You almost have to be up here to see in the whole, what would be almost considered a ground cover look, You have areas that are sparse. It's not a solid where you walk up and go, wow, this is so nicely grown all the way around. But then you also have inflorescence that, you know, some flowers are dying, some are just opening, one's missing completely. So, I mean, you do have those things that are going to take down your scoring when you're looking at it as a cultural, you know, for an overall culture.
If I can interject, would you take a look at what was most recently so highly awarded? Would you say that is more a better presentation than this, or are they on par?
I think it's comparable in the flower presentation.
That's Oaxaca.
Yes.
But as far as, if looking at the plant growth, because in cultural you're looking more than just flowers, you're also looking at the plant, because you have to when it's culture. You can see how it's much more, the fill-in is much more even. You don't really have one big gap and then everything nice. So there are some weaknesses there that would hurt the plant when it comes to culture.
What about the foliage?
As far as,
Is it clean? Is it?
yeah, the foliage is clean, like I
Is it
say,
something
it's
that's something that you take into consideration for a culture?
for culture. Yeah, the foliage is clean. You have a couple of areas that, you know, have some markings that also could be, you could also deduct in scoring because you have some markings, but you don't have leaves that are particularly, they're not trimmed to hide, you know, or trimmed for the dead at the ends or things like that. But it does have, you know, again, it does have some of those to it too.
Okay. We're going to hear, I think, from the panel at this point. Thank you very much. Your recommendation is to score. Let's see what the judges have to say about it. So we start at the other end with the young fellow.
It is a beautifully grown plant. There are issues with the arrangement and in the pot, and as far as the presentation, there's a little hole here, there's a hole in the middle, so you have a donut.
I like donuts.
I just had one. There's a couple of yellow leaves, but otherwise there's the odd blemish here and there, but for the most part, the leaves are fairly clean for a cultural award. And I'm not worried about flowers that are not symmetrical or a little twisty. For a cultural award, we're not looking necessarily at flower quality. Definitely an exceptionally grown specimen.
Does anybody have a tape measure? Dave, would you just measure the size across of the pot? Diameter?
Big.
Dave?
36 inches.
No. How many centimeters?
Oh, did you break any in?
Nope.
All right, he's
I'm
doing
okay.
right.
It's all right, I'm okay.
I would have broken at least 2 flowers had I done that. I have a prior past.
30 inches.
How many centimeters is that?
75.
Dave, the pressure
Okay.
on.
How much was that?
It's 75 centimeters across. So I turn things over at this point then to Carlos.
Well,
Which one? Why don't you sit up here, Vince? Sit up with us.
I would, I don't have much to add. I mean, when I first saw it come in, I said, wow, I've never seen this plant in such a wonderful condition, you know? And it grows in stolons, so it tends to grow around. That's the reason why it's a little more heavier around the edges than in the center, you know? But it's wonderfully grown, and certainly I agree with the assessment. He's got a couple of empty places that we need to consider if we're going to do a cultural one. But other than that, it's a wonderfully grown plant. And something is not that easy to grow.
Actually, it is.
Really, yeah.
It really is an easy plant to grow.
If you don't screw up.
No, most people don't repot it often enough, and that's where they make the mistake. It's salt sensitive. It comes from an area that has spring. There's 2 different forms of the plant. There's a large growing form and a small growing form, and this happens to be a hybrid of the two forms made by Tom Larkin. And I'm probably the only one who's seen Marilyn and Brian Ledoux's plant of Oaxaca.
Yeah.
And it has incredible even growth throughout the whole pot. So that's,
The other thing that I would add, the thing that's made this difficult to grow for people, and I think Carlos's observation is correct in some respects, because these things were fairly rare when they popped onto the market, and everybody wanted one. And so what people did is when their plant threw off a couple of stolen with new growths, they were like, whoa, cha-ching! And they cut the stolen, and they planted it up, and guess what? It died, right? But this grower did something very smart, and that was he trained the little stolons, right? That, you know, they pop up like 2 inches away from the original plant when a new growth comes up. He kept training them, or she kept training them, back around in the pot. I can tell you that we have seen this plant for judging before, okay? And it's one of the reasons why I know it's one plant.
Very important, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You can't just stuff a bunch of these in a pot and say, look, I have a big plant. We have seen this thing grow, in a sense. We've seen it at local shows. We've seen it grow. So we know it's, I mean, it's local, we know that. We don't know who the particular grower is, but we've seen the plant before.
My comment when I saw it was, too bad it's a blue tub, you know? Sort of my eye goes to the container rather than the plant, you know?
Howard Gunn was the first one to bring these in to this area. Howard got them from Tom Larkin from Whippoorwill Orchids, because Tom was the first one to have legal ones in this country. And Howard gave Aggie Atkinson some, he gave me one, he gave me 3 actually. And of course I sold 2 right away. And after 3 years I had one with 10 inflorescences. It likes our climate. It likes the drop in temperature. It comes from Mexico. That's why probably Carlos says it's hard to grow Puerto Rico, and I think it's easy to grow because we have that drop in culture or temperature.
We have a drop in culture, too.
Culture, yeah, we do. I'm on the panel. I bring it down. But, you know, when somebody comes into your greenhouse and says, gee, that plant's worth $1,200, you say, no, it's not, but you can have it. So that's why I don't know. And this plant has been grown, and that's what you want to see. You love to see a plant that somebody's taken on. But like Carlos said, it grows from a stolen, and those stolons only need to be trained in. And so it would have been nice if they trained a couple in that hole in the donut.
Well, they'll get there.
There's one that's trying to pop through the middle, so.
Yeah, it's going to be there.
It's going to get
It'll
there.
be there.
Yep.
One of the things, let me just add one other issue, because our standard for judging particularly cultural awards, one of the things you look for is essentially, I guess you could call it bang for the buck. That is, how many flowers and inflorescences on a plant in a smaller pot. And typically the way it would go is, if you have 2 plants, and they have the same number of inflorescences, same quality of plant, and one's in a 12 centimeter pot and one's in a 25 centimeter pot, then you'd give the higher award probably to the one in the 12 centimeter pot, because it gives you a better density of flowers. So one of the things I would note is that while this has a slightly larger flower count than Oaxaca, the CCE plant that got 97 points, it's in a container that's 75 centimeters, and Oaxaca was in a container that's 36 centimeters. Okay? So it's, you know, more than twice as much.
60.
Huh?
60.
Oh, the last one is 60?
Yeah.
Oh, then I was looking at the CCE that had 92, that they got 92 on. And I think that was a 36 centimeter pot. So,
This is actually a 60 centimeter pot as well.
Is it?
And there are 16 flowers, 39 buds.
And this one is what?
This one was
75.
42 flowers and 78 buds.
And this
Okay.
one actually, per inflorescence though, Oaxaca has more flowers and buds per inflorescence.
Something else to compare it on. I mean, these are the things we have to look at. Okay?
You didn't call the question,
So shall we judge this? Apparently I have a form in front of me, so somebody must have nominated this. Just one thing to know is that because we're doing collegial judging, it takes just one nomination by one of the judges on the team in order to say, yes, I'd like to judge it, and then we judge it. And so chat among yourselves. We're judging it for a cultural award. There are 3 criteria that we look at. One is the size and condition of the plant. One is floriferousness, how many flowers per spike. And the condition of the bloom is the third. Size and condition of the plant is 50 points. Floriferousness is 30, condition of the bloom is 20, for a total 100. In order for this